Yes, that is right.
A former touring musician, Chris performed with acts such as Willie Nelson and Chris Christopherson. Subsequent to receiving his MBA, Chris oversaw portfolio management at Acumen, a global nonprofit impact investing fund focused on poverty alleviation. Chris founded Sound Mind based on personal experience overcoming mental health stigma after he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in his mid-20s. Prior to founding Sound Mind, Chris also founded a music support program for those affected by mental illness with National Alliance on Mental Illness in New York City. Chris holds a BA from the University of Southern California and an MBA from Fordham University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chris Bullard.
That was quite the intro. I don't know if I can live up to that, but good to see you all. Thank you all for being here at this event, at this panel. I'm really, really excited for this. So this panel is on the importance of lived experience, which I think anyone who has either dealt with a mental health related issue or knows someone who has dealt with it can agree that that's so vital to be literally just listening to one another. I think we hear it every day how important it is, but when it comes to these inner world challenges that we have as humans, sometimes we push past the listening and just try to fix things, or sometimes we don't have the ability to just sit with stuff and listen. And it's so important. And I'm curious, here today, who in the audience, just vaguely would identify as having lived experience with mental health issues? So literally everyone, which I think, we talked a little bit before. I think we talked a little bit about, this touches everyone. And also a part of that too with lived experience. How many of you would you say part of that lived experience has offered you a sense of growth and resilience in your life? Everyone as well. So I think this is also one of the things that we really want to talk about in this panel too, the importance of lived experience in helping people get support, but also realize that there is beauty in this journey as well, in this mental health journey, if we want to call it that. So I will introduce our panelists. To my left, Haley Amering, who is the Government Affairs Coordinator with the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York. Let's welcome Haley. Karin, oh my God, I didn't write down your last name.
Oh, it's Jervert.
Jervert, of course.
Jervert.
Jervert. Yeah, Karin Jervert. I know you as Karin now because we've talked so many times.
Yes, Karin the Garage.
Yeah.
Is the best way to remember.
Amering and Karin the Garage. Artist, writer, psychiatric survivor, and activist, and arts editor at Mad in America. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
And you saw him earlier today, Langhorne Slim. Langhorne, Sean, how do you like to go?
Sean's good. Slimmy Pie.
Slimmy Pie?
What you usually call me when...
Slim Zabab.
Sean is fine, yeah.
Langhorne Slim, Sean Skolnick, please welcome. So I think just a good way to start this off in any which way, and also want this to be a dialogue, so it doesn't have to be a total Q&A, but just to share a little about each of your own journey, maybe a couple, 2 minutes, just on what your own path has been related to mental health, so we can set some of the context. Haley, do you want to start?
I would love to start. So, it's really crazy because when I first noticed my mental health kind of declining, I guess you could say, I was only 10 years old. And that was, when you're that young, that's your sense of normality. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm just more serious. And then as that progressed more and more, I just started experiencing more anxiety, more feelings of sadness, and taking things just super seriously again. And so, I knew something was up, and it was until I was in middle school, I'd say about 13 years old, where I started utilizing my school's counseling services there. And I really connected with my counselor, luckily. It was literally life-saving. And from that, I did start to pursue mental health treatment. Luckily, my parents were very supportive of that, but unfortunately, I was just met with a lot of misdiagnosis, mistreatment. I mean, I went through diagnoses of anxiety, depression, bipolar 1, borderline personality disorder. I've been on over 20 different medications for all of that, and it happened in such a huge moment in my life that it really impacted me. And so I just use my experience with that to try to reach other people, even if it's one other person. I mean, I'm happy to say I'm in a great spot in my recovery today, and it wouldn't have been possible had I not experienced everything that I did. Thank you.
That's so beautiful, and I'm so glad you're sharing your story and helping so many people through the work that you're doing. Karin, what about you?
Thank you for that. Yeah, it sounds like you had a little bit of a psych survivor experience there. So, yeah, I identify as a psych survivor, which is basically a similar story around misdiagnosis, mistreatment, abuse, forced treatment in psychiatric wards. So, I mean, other than that, my personal experience is very much with altered states, voices and visions, and sadness, what we call depression, extreme states, extreme emotional states. I was labeled bipolar at 21. Other things came along. I was on, I think, 16 or 18 over the 20 years since I was labeled bipolar. I don't identify as bipolar any longer. I identify as, basic human being who struggles sometimes to understand her unique way of perceiving the world and experiencing the world. And I approach it basically in very varied ways, like politically, talking about oppression and things like that, ways those things affect our lives, sociologically, and artistically. I'm an artist, most of all. If you were to ask me who I am, I'm an artist. And then, also just spiritually. So, and I also find myself at a good point in my recovery right now. And it has involved a very long withdrawal journey from 5 different psych meds. And I'm grateful for my life, grateful for the struggles that brought me here, really. I'm grateful to be here today to talk to you guys. So thanks for having me.
So grateful for you.
The way that you describe your experience is very moving to me, both of you. And though I don't do a lot of paneling, this is really beautiful. And I also love that everybody here talks about the beauty and the power of these challenges and the fact that we can all be here and discuss them. I have found in my own journey with mental health, in recovery, which is a big part of my story, addiction, it's the grease, man. Like, that is where it's at. Because if some academic or doctor is talking to me and telling me this and that, I don't relate to it. But when I'm in recovery and with other addicts and they're talking about their experience and their story, it lights my spirit up because I believe it, and it's so true. And so this does as well. So I'm rambling, but I'll just say, I was born an anxious boy. I've been an anxious boy pretty much ever since. I'm also thank goodness, in a very good place in my life at the moment. We can talk in about 10 minutes and see how things are then. I did a lot of self-medicating as quickly. I think I was self-medicating before I ever found drugs or alcohol in other ways. And just really went hard down that path. I grew up in a way that, through no fault of anybody, I don't think, but it wasn't a very let's sit down and talk about it and go to therapy and stuff. I think it was like, life is hard. Nobody told anybody it's going to be easy, which is true. And kind of, toughen up. And I don't even regret or resent that stuff, because I think life is tough and you do have to be resilient. But I just feel like at this point, a cat with 9 lives, and I got sober like 10 years ago, I didn't find a community of like-minded brothers and sisters to find sort of a more expansive spiritual way of life, if you will. And without any kind of tools, about 5 years ago, I relapsed on a prescription medication that was prescribed to me for my anxiety. And then I was off to the races with all kinds of other things. Before the pandemic, went into treatment and got a therapist and have stuck with that path. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
I'm sure there's a lot more.
Let's talk about how spectacularly terrifying life is.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, let's talk
endlessly
about that.
terrifying and then endlessly beautiful, I think.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I just loved how you said that.
The beauty and the terror.
Yeah,
Beauty in the
I mean,
terror.
the beauty in the terror too. Like, I like what you talked about. I think multiple people of like what you've gone through. You know, the fact that life is difficult is like what bonds us. And from like a kid, I was like an angsty teen, thrashing in punk rock shows, and I think that was me dealing with all these emotions in this inner world I didn't know what to do. And in my 20s, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and that was a similar thing with all these things in my inner world I didn't know what to do with. And yet, where I am now, that all of those experiences have given so much fruit to like my relationships and my life and the people I've met. And I know we got to chat a little bit earlier, and we're talking about this idea of like this as like these challenges as like superpowers in a way, and like reframing that, which obviously thinking of anything too much as a superpower is dangerous, but like I think there's a lot of superpower in that idea too. And I'm curious, if anyone wants to pick up just on what that might mean for you, because it seemed like we all identified with that in some sort of way. And I think for a lot of people with lived experience, they could relate to that or learn from it.
I think for myself, my eyes were open to like, wow, like being mentally ill, you actually can have some strengths in that when the pandemic hit. Because I saw so many of my friends, so many of my family, I was seeing on the news, like all these people impacted, their mental health was impacted. And, being a student at the time, having my structure taken away, rocked me a little bit. But what I found more, I guess, empowering was the fact that I had really been preparing for that my whole life. Right. I had been like isolating, that's what I had always done. Like that was nothing new. But no, seriously, I mean, at the time I was doing a lot of DBT treatment and focusing on emotion regulation and just like, what do we do when we're in crisis? So I was like, pandemic, bet. I got that in the bag. But really though, like being able to do that work, thankfully, before the pandemic, I feel like helped me cement all of that and just really understanding and sitting with like that deep feeling of, I guess, loneliness or sorrow, whatever it really is that doesn't necessarily feel comfy in the moment. But I mean, reflecting on that, I feel like that's where it all started for me, for sure.
That's really funny because the pandemic was an extremely strong growth period for me too. I started withdrawing from medication around 2019, and then 2020 hit. And having a space of my own to explore my own perceptions, the way that my mind works. Like I've mentioned, my experience includes voices and visions, altered states, things like that. So actually the isolation of the pandemic was helpful because I was able to actually sit with those feelings and those experiences and those perceptions. And I live alone in my apartment, and basically my apartment became my own art studio that was also, AKA processing things that I wasn't allowed to process before because of the treatment that I was sort of receiving that felt to me a bit oppressive, that I wasn't allowed to have these superpowers, really. I mean, I wasn't allowed to have these experiences that actually are just these intuitive ways of knowing that we have lost in our society. You look back in indigenous cultures around the world, voice hearing and visions is an absolutely normal phenomenon. And we don't teach people how to deal with these phenomena, these perceptions, and these experiences anymore because we've lost those stories. And I'm not just talking about Native Americans, I'm talking about European descent, I'm talking about African descent, I'm talking about all indigenous people around the world. these stories have been lost. Our guidance systems have been lost. So when in the pandemic I had this time, I was able to find and make my own map for being this type of person who had this way of knowing. So for me, the superpower is that I have a different way of knowing and an intuition that I can trust, despite the years and years of it being demonized and tried to be eradicated. So for me, there's, I think that for me, the superpower is this way that we speak to ourselves and the intuition of knowing that may be different from others, but is still a way of knowing.
I think they're going to write books about this for a long time, and it's interesting to be in a place now that I remember coming out of the pandemic feeling similarly to you two, where it was like, I'm kind of pissed off that we're coming out of the pandemic. And I felt like that was a wild way to feel and not something I should probably admit to people. And it, certainly for me, it was I didn't get terribly sick or, lose anybody super close. So not to diminish anything from that time, of course, but we talked on our Zoom call as well, like, I could only speak for myself, but perhaps some of you will agree. We are so distracted. I am so distracted in my life from nature and what is natural that no wonder we're all, a lot of us are feeling high anxiety. I think that time, I've been running for one reason or another for my whole life, thinking I need to achieve this or that, thinking that if I could just get that person to dance with me, I'll be happy. If I could just sell out this theater, I could be happy. If I just write this song, I could be happy. If I move to this town, so on and so forth. And to be forced to sit my ass down was terrifying, but beautiful.
Spectacularly terrifying.
Yeah, oh my God. Thankfully, I had adopted a cat right before it
help.
Yes, cats solve all problems.
The cat was really important.
Best therapist.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I don't know, losing my train of thought, but cats are good.
That's all that really needs to be said, isn't it?
It's the main takeaway.
Cats are good.
I think that, that maybe the point I was trying to make is cats are good, and also it is a constant to this day and probably for the rest of my life, just something that I'm trying to remind myself of, like, it's cliche, but less is more. If I slow my roll, there's universes in that space that open up to me that when I'm constantly trying to, and this is a big recovery thing as well, like when I'm constantly trying to control things and make you do what I want you to do and get my way with this or that, my life becomes very narrow and I become very uptight. And if I'm able to expand my dance floor, my moves become more groovy.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
I also love what you said about, like, universes opening up to you and, like, this idea, like, you were talking also about intuition and, like, different ways of knowing. And I know in my own experience, when I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder, it's because I was having these, like, altered ways of perceiving the world and I didn't know what to do with it. But like you said, in many shamanistic cultures, it's like, oh, you're going through that? Let's just guide you through that. And I think the story I got was like, oh, this is what's wrong with you. We know a little bit about how to fix it. And it felt very othering for me, even though no one was telling me I was a bad person, but it was not validating in the beauty of that side of my experience. And to me, it seems really important to tap into that intuitive way of knowing, or just other ways of knowing, whatever those are, because we live in this hyper-rationalistic, hyper-productive society where, Sean, what you said, I'm constantly like, oh yeah, if I'm produce a festival. Yeah, it'll be good then. I'll be happy. And like that game doesn't work. But when you like sit with whatever the feeling or the perception is, and you just explore that, which takes time, and that's hard to find a lot of time, ironically. But worlds open up inside of you and outside of you too, which is amazing. You start meeting new people. You start finding a new path that resonates with you more, at least, again, only speaking from my own experience, but as I talk with everyone about their own lived experience, it's a shared journey everyone has. And so I'm curious, I talked a little bit about like being diagnosed, and like for some people the label is helpful, for others it feels stigmatizing. And I'm curious to just talk a little bit about like the role of labels that we have with mental health, and like in what ways, as you all view it right now, are the labels helpful? Are they hurting in any way? Like what are your thoughts?
It's a loaded question, but it's a great question. I think, it's hard. Especially when the label isn't really accurate. Or even if it is accurate, any diagnosis I've ever gotten, my first thought is, okay, what does this mean for me? Like, what is everyone else going to think about this? And I get in my head about that, and as someone that already has a mental health disorder, you don't really need overthinking to be added even more on the plate than it already is. So I think for me, it's been debilitating when it hasn't necessarily felt accurate. And when I finally got to a point where I was accurately diagnosed with PTSD, like in the last year I'm talking, those worlds did open for me, because I was like not so much focused on the label, but it gave me a path on knowing how I could get better. So that was what was most important to me on that.
So when I think about this topic, I kind of think about two things, is how language can kind of create reality in a way, and like an architecture of nearly everything, the words and the language we use to describe ourselves. And I think about my own experience. Let me just go back to that, because I lost my train of thought for the second one. I know I said I had two things, but I never, when I got the label of bipolar, and I fought it tooth and nail for a really, really long time, and for good reason, because in the end it didn't fit, but I guess I'm hesitating, because this is just such you create our healthcare system is fucked, right? And
Modestly putting it.
Something everyone can agree on.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to navigate this in like a way, not saying, guys, our healthcare system's fucked. The diagnosis system is kind of fucked on top of that. Sorry, should I stop saying fuck?
We can curse here.
So, but what does happen is that people need help. And like I needed help. I was struggling. I was having these experiences, like I said before. I had no one to guide me. I had no stories to read about people who lived with this, who actually worked with this, who like contributed to society with this, who like, helped others day to day. Like I had no example of that. All I had was, oh dude, you're broke. You need this pill forever. And also, it's really dangerous to everyone, including yourself, if you ever get off. So it was on top of that a threat to even find healing of my own definition. So it can get really sticky for me, like to talk about this. But one thing that diagnoses do is, like I've said before, it's like a white flag where you're like, wait, hold on, I need some help. And here's like what I'm being told is why. So here, and then there's an access point that opens for you in the world, but to a messed up healthcare system that has to be navigated and is really hard to be navigated. So there's a very complicated benefit and a complicated drawback, but for me, My personal experience is that I've just dropped it. I don't use that language to talk about myself. When I say I struggle from extreme sadness, that what I mean by that is depression. Or I experience non-ordinary states. What I mean by that is psychosis. Or I'm a voice hearer, well, that's sort of self-explanatory. But I choose my language to create the architecture of my own life. I don't take on the language of the medical industry to describe myself, because it, for me, was so disempowering to the architecture that I was living in. So that's my story.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I love all that, man. Oh man. I mean, I can tie this up in an experience that I had when I got sober. I went to visit my regular doctor for a checkup. I told you guys this on the Zoom. That doctor wasn't there, so I was seen by this other doctor who was there. I was going for like a physical, and this person came in and was like, "Have you ever been told that you are bipolar?" And I said, "No, but I have never asked." And she said, "Well," and she pulled out a book and like the bipolar Bible or something, and like read me all these things, and I was like, "Fuck yeah, yeah, yeah." And she's like, "Yeah, sweetie, you are bipolar." And at that time, I was searching so much, I think, to understand whatever I have felt challenged by in my life, that when I was told that, I felt empowered, super empowered. I was like, there's a name, there's this whole book with all these symptoms of what I am, and the ones that I didn't relate to, I was like, oh, that's okay. I'm pretty sure I'm bipolar. So because I was just getting sober and coming off these drugs that I was taking, pharmaceutical drugs, when they said, well, we've got some drugs that you can take, I said, no, I'm going to get sober and be sober without any medication for a while. And I think about a year later, I went back to the doctor and I said, where's that bipolar doctor lady who told me? Because I might be interested, I'm still struggling, and I might be interested in talking to her. And they said, she no longer works here because she was diagnosing everybody bipolar. And she had bipolar in her family and was probably traumatized from her experience.
She was working her own shit out. Oh my God.
Yeah. And so that was kind of eye-opening for me. I will say my best friend is mid-40s or something like that, and is right now finding out that he's autistic. I think he's always known that he is something or another. And he went to, I live in Nashville, he went to this place, I think in Kentucky, the specialist. And for him, he doesn't want to be medicated or anything, but he wants to understand, and he's got 2 daughters, one of which is displaying a lot of the behaviors and things that he himself has. And so he wants to understand that for himself and for his family. And I've been reading some stuff on like ADHD, which I always just thought as a kid when they told me I had that, I was like, no, man. Like the test then was, I remember they said, do you daydream in school? Do you have a hard time doing your homework? Do you doodle? I was like, yes, I do.
Are you an artist?
Yeah, right. But now I've been reading about stuff like that, and I have found that there is some, I love not letting the language of the industry determine our reality. I'm all for that. And I've also found in reading some stuff about some of these labels that I do find myself in some of it, and if I do read and talk to some friends about it, it can be helpful. Much like talking to alcoholics and addicts is really helpful for me. So,
yeah, and I would say me too. Like while we don't know everything about diagnosis, and the DSM, like the Bible of diagnoses, is explaining symptoms that you experience, which when you are resonating with those experiences, you're like, oh wow, I get this, and I can meet other people that are experiencing similar things, and it can set a path forward. While the label itself may be helpful or not, it can definitely be a white flag, I love that word, and just kind of like set a path forward that can be the beginning of something new, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, and also Haley and I were talking about how, it's your story. You get to tell it, and that's the important thing. That's the whole shish kebab.
Yeah, and tuning into that, I think back to like taking time with yourself, like whatever the story is you're told by a therapist or a psychiatrist, they're trained professionals, but tune into your own story and what resonates and talk that out with people. I think that, for me, that's been really helpful to know. With all the mental health work I've been doing, it's like, if you have a psychiatrist and they're not listening to you, or you have a therapist and they're just kind of there passing the time, like you can find someone better that really speaks to your heart and your soul. I do want to leave some time for questions because I know we're close to time. Are there any questions for any of us or all of us?
My question actually is for you. It was interesting hearing, like, when you were talking coming out of the pandemic, because I'm sure it's got to be weird too. Like, you're Sean as a person, but you're Langhorne Slim as a performer. So, like, during the pandemic, you had all this time to be Sean and focus on that, right? And then the pandemic was over. You're like kind of disappointed. Like, my first thought was, oh, that must be cool. You're a musician. You get to be in front of people again. You get to do what you love. But with that part of the pressure, like, oh, I have to be Langhorne Slim again, and like that duality.
Huh. I was surprised during the. Okay, I have a buddy who he made a post online that said, what I would do today for my worst show in Cleveland, and I couldn't relate to that at all because I've had some shitty shows in Cleveland. Like I was able to, not every day of it by any means, but I was able to find some kind of connection that I think, I really needed, that tided me over. And actually, when we were all coming back out, I was excited to play again, but I was a little bit off balance until we got into the club or the festival, and then it was like, okay, this is what we do. I don't know. I feel like, I don't know what I feel like. I feel like that those years, it felt very cosmic, man, with how things lined up for me in my life, to have gone to treatment, to have started therapy, and then have this time, and then I learned how to use Zoom. Whoever developed Zoom is probably very wealthy. But, that provided me, my meetings, and learned to use the phone when I was freaking out, and just to really connect with people that are on this path. So, yeah, thank you. Hope I answered that.
Thank you. We've got some questions back here.
This question's for Haley. Hey. So you mentioned that you felt that you'd been finally correctly diagnosed with PTSD. So what about that experience made you realize it was, I guess, more or less correct?
I could shout, but you guys might not want that. Yeah, such a great question. I think it was just this intuitive feeling. It just clicked, and I focused more on I just was hearing more and more about the symptoms, and I was just like, holy fuck, like that's a lot. So it was scary, but it was also really empowering because, again, like I just knew how to address all of that. So I think just trusting my intuition, that's always been like the biggest thing, and I think you touched on that so beautifully, Karin, and that, when something doesn't click. And I think really listening to yourself is where that comes from.
I think we have time for one more
Hi.
question. Oh, someone has a mic.
It's on the heels of that, but Friday night after a rock. Hi, sorry, I'm in a kind of a crisis situation, and I would really appreciate some feedback on this. But Friday night after a rock show that my ex-husband and my son went to, my son experienced a psychotic break, and he's been using marijuana pretty regularly, and then he I think, got a bad diagnosis and got some Prozac, but he violently attacked my ex-husband and was taken to the ER. And the police told him that he would be released to a hospital. But in fact, once he left the hospital, he was taken to jail. And because it was the weekend, he couldn't be arraigned until Monday. So he spent 2 nights in jail, and the second night called me to say that, do I have to tell someone that I'm thinking about killing myself in order to be in a place that I feel safe? So I immediately called and said, I need you to check on my son, please. And then they put him in a suicide watch place in a turtle jumpsuit. But he was arraigned and released Monday. And after a day of a lot of bargaining, he willingly admitted himself to the hospital. But I don't need attention. I'm only to ask you, as someone who just turned 18, and I'm not allowed to know what his diagnosis or his medical information is yet until he comes enough to his mind to be able to share it with me. I can't talk to him by phone, but as anyone, my real question is, he's medicated now and he's finally calm and stabilized, but if you were to share anything with him about someone who's his age coming to grips with the rite of passage of becoming an adult and also what lies ahead, like what would you say to encourage him?
Yeah.
How would you encourage my son?
Yeah, first I just want to say, as you know, being his mother, I want to extend to you just a lot of solidarity and love and strength, send you a lot of strength. My mother too, I was 21 and she couldn't reach me. My father and her could not reach me when the first time I was hospitalized. So my family has that same story. My mom said she almost jumped over the table when the guy told her that she couldn't see me. Second, I would say to your son, he's not broken. There's nothing wrong with him. And he needs to know that. He needs to know that he is okay and he's having a human experience. Something's happening to him that is real and hard and scary and different, but he will get through it. And there are people and resources. If he's a voice hearer, there's the Hearing Voices Network. There's plenty of groups out there that help people young people through altered states. There's Open Dialogue, which is an interesting thing you might want to look up. There's a lot of hope here. This is not the end of your son's story. He is going to get better. You hear me? Okay?
Yeah, I just, what you said about not the end of your son's story, like I think that really resonated for me, having been in a psych ward 3 times and just really the beginning of my story in many ways. I mean, you know, we all live chapters in many ways and opened up so many beautiful pathways. And I think one of the things I've appreciated most about my parents was support finding the pathways and, you know, putting those down, but then ultimately also saying, you know, you're your own human and you know, this is your path and I want to support you. And I think a lot of what we've been talking about here today too, of just like, these are really tough experiences and our society doesn't totally know how to handle them in all the ways, but there's a lot of people who are either providing that support in so many different ways, in the traditional system, in non-traditional systems. Happy to talk to you after about other resources. And there's so many other people going through similar things, and I think that's what's been so rewarding for me too, of, you know, I'm sure with like recovery journeys, like it's a similar thing of like, wow, you said it earlier, you're other people on the path. And in many ways, this is a path, it's a journey. And just, yeah, a lot of love.
Do you mind if I add something really quick?
Yeah, of course.
I would encourage you to help your son through learning his relationship to altered states and pot as medicine, like the plant medicine. Like, maybe just, there are a lot of books out there about altered states, and maybe he can get a better relationship to his ability to go there,
I know we're running out of time, but I also wanted to extend love to you. I can't imagine what that's like as a mother, but my mother can imagine. In my early 20s, I had a psychotic break, what they called a psychotic break. I asked the doctor, how do you know that this is a psychotic break? I think I've just entered into some other dimension. And he's like, well, I think you've had a psychotic break. Mine was, unlike some experiences I think that you guys have had, was drug related. And I think regardless of what the situation your boy is in, there's a lot of people who have experienced that. I'll just echo what these beautiful people have already said. And to surround him with love. It's so true. I know we're running out of time here, but it's like as soon as you tell somebody, I don't know if anybody has ever not had, is there humans that have not thought of killing themselves at some point? I don't know. But I know that when they ask you that question and you tell them that, yeah, sometimes I've thought about, that opens up a whole lot. It's just a tricky system that I have found in my experience. The place that they put me for a few days, I always loved the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but I didn't love living in it, and I figured that they had made a few improvements since back then, and I don't know, at least in the place I went to, but definitely not the end. I would say a beginning, and yeah, I would say so, and I don't know. I just think that to reach out to people that have had these experiences and know that you guys aren't alone in this, and there's a lot of hope and help and love and support. So we send you lots of love.
Yes. Thank you. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have, but thank you all so much. Thank you, Haley, Karin, Sean, and thank you all for being here and listening. And that's it. That's the end of the event.